Cool. So let's take a look at, actually before we start, let's take a look at sort of my solution to the studio yesterday. So we're on the same, or the studio on Thursday, so we're all on the same page about how we kind of got to where we are now. Oh, and if you want to, so if you want to follow along and try to like type along with this, you can just check out the branch for this walkthrough. So that the command there would be git checkout -b walk through for origin / walk through for. Is that big enough? I'm gonna make it bigger. I'm not actually gonna do this command because I don't even know. I think it's gonna yell at me. Yeah, because I already have that branch. But if you do it, that should work. Let's see. I'm gonna make sure I'm on the right branch. Yes, I'm on the walkthrough for branch. Great. Cool. So where we're starting from is kind of the solution to the studio yesterday. So I'm going to quickly go over that. So, right. So we had this method called getRandomMovie, and we had a couple of to-dos in here, right, where we're supposed to just make a list of movies, whatever we want, and then return one of them. But the one we return should be random, so it should be different every time you call it. So this first declaration here, and yeah, I'll take this slow because Python's new to you guys. We just make a variable called movies, and in Python we don't have to say, like in Java you would have had to say like list of string or something, right? And declare the type. Python is a dynamically typed language, which means you do not have to declare the type of the data that you're working with. So we just say what it's called, and we're going to call it movies. And to make a list, you just use these square brackets, and then you can initialize a list with a bunch of stuff in it by just putting the stuff in between the opening and closing square bracket here. So we have a comma separated list of strings, and each string represents the title of the movie. So this is our movies list or array. Well, it's a list. It's a list. And then, so we want to choose one of these movies. So the way there were a couple equally good ways to do this. So the way we're doing it here is we're gonna pick a random index. So there happen to be 5 movies in here. So we're gonna pick a random index, either 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, and then we're gonna return the thing at that index. So let's come back to this in one sec, but just take my word for it that this ends up being a number between 0 and 4, inclusive of 4. And then we return movies square bracket that number, which I think should look, that's how you do it in Java, right? Same thing? So you index into a list? Yeah, cool. Any questions so far? Cool. So then let's talk about how did we generate that random number. We have kind of 2 things going on here. One is we said random.randrange parentheses this. What I'll do for one sec is I'm going to just replace this with just the number 5, because that's what we want. So what this does is it gives us a random number, random integer between 0 and 5. I think not including 5. Yeah. So what is this? Where does this random come from? It comes from up here. We're importing a package or like a module called random, which is like a library that does randomness type stuff for us. And then to call the functions that are associated with that module, we just say the name of the module dot the function that we want. And in this case, the function we want is this one called rand_range, where you give it a range and it'll give you a number in between that range. So I think you have the sort of optional option to specify a lower bound on the range here. So if I had said something like this, we would have, instead of, so 0 is like the default, but if we wanted to, we could have specified another number. But in this case, we just want 0, so we just have to specify the upper bound and whatever. You don't have to really care about how this works, about the specifics of all this, but this function will give us that number, then we use that number to get the index. And so the other thing, the instructions, I remember the instruction said, don't just put a 5 here, right? Because in general, you want to try to avoid putting like magic numbers, so to speak, in your code. You don't want to just hard code sort of arbitrary things like that, because like, so it happens to be the case that there are 5 things in our list this time, but you don't necessarily know that when you get here, and you're sort of tying yourself to there being 5. So like later, if I wanted to add a bunch of movies in here, if I add another movie, now I have to go and manually change this to 6, which doesn't seem that bad, but if you are in this habit of doing this, it'll expand and there's going to be all kinds of stuff you're going to have to change later. So instead of this being a 5 or a 6, we want this to just be computed to be whatever the length of the list is. So that's why we had this in here. And you know what? I'm going to separate it. So I'll say num movies equals something, right? We'll come back to that. And then this should be num movies. So however many movies there are, we want a number between 0 and 1 less than that. So then to calculate that, we use this function len, which just, you pass it a list and it'll tell you how many things are in that list. So we say len movies. And let's run this and see if it works. Make it bigger. Cool, so we're getting different stuff every time. I think some of the TFs told me that some of you guys kind of went above and beyond. Oh, and I'll talk about this in a sec too. This is the other part. Above and beyond, and like made it so that tomorrow's movie could never be the same as today's movie, which technically you didn't have to do, but that's cool that you did that. But I'm just getting lucky here, and it's never happening. But theoretically it could. Cool. Any questions about? Oh yeah, and then we're returning the answer, and you guys are familiar with returning value from a function. Any other questions about that? Yeah. Yeah. I'm just using a normal terminal window, so you'll have Git shell if you're on a Windows machine. But yeah. You want me to just keep this up so you can? Okay. Okay. One sec. Just rearrange this stuff a little bit. Cool. So then I'm going to talk about this other part that we have to do, which is so now this part works. We get a random movie and we assign it to a variable called movie, and we add this stuff to our response, and then it shows up here as the movie of the day. And then your other job was to make tomorrow's movie, which is more or less the same thing, like very much the same thing, right? We just call this method again, and because it's random, we have to call it again, so we couldn't be like, you couldn't like, never mind. So we have to call it again, and we assign it into a different variable. We'll call it tomorrow movie, and then we just pretty much do the same exact thing. We give it a different title header thing, and we put that inside an H1 tag, which makes it nice and big. And then we display the name of the movie itself inside of a paragraph tag. And it works. I talked to a couple people in the evening class who they finished the whole thing, and they're like, so I did it, but what the heck am I doing? Like, how does this actually work? Which was definitely like my experience when I was first learning this stuff. So maybe it would help if I just kind of go over, in general, like what is, in the big picture, what's happening here. So I'll try to do that. Before I do that, are there any questions about this section here? Cool. So what's happening is we're running Google App Engine, and you should, unless you have a Linux machine, you'll have some kind of graphical user interface like this with your projects, and then you'll have one called ClickList Python. Maybe that's at this point the only. Maybe you'll have two at this point. And you click this run thing. So what does that do? So this project, this project is pointing to the code that you have here inside this folder. And what it's doing is the App Engine launcher is running a server whose root directory is this folder. So essentially, and so what the server is doing is it's just listening for requests, HTTP requests. And when the request comes in, it's sending responses back. So our job as the people who write the web app is to configure this code such that we respond appropriately to various requests. So right now, there's only one request going on, which is someone visiting slash, which is kind of confusing, but it'll make more sense once you see other routes, which we'll do in a minute. But so like slash represents the home page, as in like flicklist.com or whatever our site is called, slash nothing, because we're on the home page. That's the slash. But so then, later we're going to have, I'll just do this now. Later we're going to have slash add, and that's going to let someone add a movie to their list. And so we're telling the app at this point, we're saying, hey, there's another like URL route that you should be aware of, and if someone sends a request, if someone visits the site, which really what's going on there is they're sending a request to this route, then you should do whatever we put here. So for now, we only have one route here, and it goes to slash, and we're telling it run this, run the code associated with this index class if a request comes in from slash. And this index class has two methods. One is just this get random movie method, which is just a sort of an internal helper that we're using here. The more important one is get, which means that it is meant for HTTP GET requests. So don't confuse this with like in Java you'll have in your properties, right? You had like instance variables, and then you made like getters and setters for those things. This is totally different than that. So basically, web app 2, which is like the library that's working in conjunction with Google App Engine to like make everything happen and like wire everything together so that the correct code gets run in response to the correct requests. web app 2 knows to look for a method called get. So if it was an so you know how there's like these different type of HTTP requests? There's get, post, there's a few others that are more obscure, like delete. So whenever a get request, this is like the default request. If you just go to you just visit a page, you're sending, if you go to a browser and visit a page like google.com, your browser is sending an HTTP GET request to the server on which Google's app is running. And then, just like we have here, Google somewhere has some code that's sitting here waiting for that GET request to come in and then saying, okay, a request came in, we want to respond with a bunch of stuff, and it sends over all the HTML and everything else needed for our browser to render this page for us. So that's what we're doing here. And so what we want to do, so whenever a request comes in, it's going to run this code. And what we decide to do is forgot to plug in my computer. I'm going to go do that right now. Cool. So we define this get method, and we know that whenever a request comes in, our job is to give the appropriate response. So we're kind of building up a big string here. Essentially, we're just responding by writing a large Python string with all the content, the HTML content that we want. So that's why all this HTML stuff is in quotes. We're just treating it like a big string, and then it's almost as if you just print it, system out print. It's almost like you're just printing it, but instead of printing it, you're sending it over to the, you're sending it like across the internet to the browser, and then the browser gets the string, and because it's HTML, the browser says, oh, I know what to do with this. I know how to render HTML, and it renders it. Yeah. Any questions about this stuff? Yes. Yeah. This one? Yeah, good question. So the question was, what's the deal with this self? And he had something different for this line. So Python is a little weird, and this is, I believe, for like historical reasons. They didn't want it to be this way, but like they got stuck having to make it this way based on the code they'd already written. So you basically, any method in a class, the first argument is going to be self. And self is, you guys are familiar with, I think in Java it's called this, right? Yeah, self is the same as this. So the only weird thing here, I think the only thing that should look odd to you, aside from the name changing from this to self, is the fact that it's passed as a parameter. And for now, I'm just going to say, just accept that that's how it has to be, and try not to worry about it. Other questions? Cool. So I'm going to get started on the walkthrough. So what we want to do now is we want to try to make, so for prep work, you guys learned about forms, or you started to learn about forms, right? So let's try to use that. So what we want to make now is a form via which a user can type in the name of a movie and then add it to their list. And right now there is no real list because we haven't learned all the tools we need to actually keep track of their list, and we'll learn that in a couple weeks. So for now, we're just gonna pretend. So the person's gonna type a thing, and then we're gonna say, thanks, The Big Lebowski has been added to your list, even though it's a lie, okay? So I'm gonna clear out a decent amount of the stuff we did. So we don't need this anymore. We don't need the random module anymore. And let's start with the get request. So we need, pretty much none of this. So what we want here instead is it should say, we want to display a form via which the user can type this thing in. So what we want to respond with is the HTML for rendering that form. I'm going to store that in a variable, and I'll call it add form. So this is a form for adding a movie to your list. Equals. This is a cool thing you can do in Python is you can use 3 quotation marks, and then you can define your string across multiple lines, so it's not crammed all into one line. And then, let's see, what should I do first? I'm going to not start with the form, actually. I'm going to start with the input. I'm going to make it an input tag whose type is text, which means there's a bunch of these input tags. So this one lets you make a text box. Maybe I'll just start with that. So I made a variable called add form, and there's almost nothing in it. It's just one little text box, we hope. And then I made a new variable called response, and I just said it's equal to add form. The reason I'm doing this instead of just putting add form directly in here is because later there's going to be stuff I'm going to add to this line in a sec. So let's see what happens when I do this. I'm hoping we just see a single text box. Cool, there it is. Next, I'm going to put another input here with a different type. The type of this input is going to be submit. Oh, and I forgot technically you want a slash here before the closing tag, because these are one of those inputs generally are one of these tags that, so normally you would have like the hello close p, and you can maybe even put other stuff in here, other child tags, like an image or something. Whatever, it doesn't matter. Some tags are not really meant to have child content inside of it, in which case it would be pointless to have a closed input, because you're never going to put stuff in between the beginning and the end. So it's a tag that immediately closes itself, and technically you want to put this, it'll work anyway if you don't, but you want to put this slash here to close the tag as soon as you start it. So we have this input, we have this input. So inputs are kind of a weird HTML element, in my opinion, because they you think of most of them as like, oh, I know what that is. That's a text box or that's a paragraph or something. But these can take drastically different, like, visual forms. The only thing that they all have in common is some way for the user to give their input. So this, you change the type to submit. Now, the second thing shows up here, and it's a button. It's totally different. These are both inputs. They just have different types. The reason it's called submit is because this is the button that you click when you're finished filling out the form and you want to submit the form. Question? Okay. So now I can type stuff and I can click this button, but nothing happens. That's because we haven't actually put this stuff inside of a form. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to move these guys over and put them inside of a form. So we start the form, we put the inputs in here, and then we end the form. Let's just start with that. See what happens. Type something, click submit. Yeah, so it's actually different already. Notice how I type something, I click the button, and the stuff goes away. And in fact, what's really happening is I'm clicking submit, and the page is refreshing itself. So it's not just deleting the text, it's actually revisiting this URL. So by default, if you don't specify anything else, the submit button is going to submit to the current URL that you're already on. So that's what we're doing here. Is we're sending now that we're inside a form. When I click this button, we're actually sending a new request to the server, and it's going to this same /index route. So let's change that. And I'm trying to think what order to do this stuff in. So so by default, we're going to go back to the same place, the same page we're currently on, but we want to go to a new route /add, I'm going to say. This is the route for handling these form submissions, which are ones in which the person wants to add something to their list. And for now, I'm going to say index. So basically, any requests that come into this route will get handled by this same class. So for now, we're going to change this later, but this same class is going to handle requests coming in from either of these routes. And let's do this now. So I'm going to make a new class. I'm going to call it add movie. So we're going to have to define a new class with this name, and then that class is going to be the one that handles this form submission. So we can try to run this now without doing that, and I imagine it's going to yell at us. So it definitely didn't work. We got a 500 error. 500 is a server error. So this makes sense. I was hoping we'd get like an actual nice error message, but because we're the users here, it just says 500 represents something went wrong on the back end. So we're trying to use this site, and it says, sorry, yeah, this page isn't working. The reason it's not working is because we're referring to this thing, but we haven't defined it anywhere. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to do it largely the same I'm going to use this as a template for doing that. Add movie. We also want to inherit from, and I didn't talk about this before, but we're inheriting from a parent class called request handler, and this request handler class is defined in this web app 2 module. So this is the same as in Java if you said index extends request handler, which means we inherit all of the methods and we don't have to redefine them here. So there's probably a lot of functionality in here that we get for free by subclassing from the parent request handler class. And it makes sense that they're called request handlers because that's exactly what we're doing here, is we're handling requests that are coming in. So let's define our own get method. And I'm just going to say self.response.array. You added a movie. And let's just, we know we've done everything right if we do this. So if we run it now, I think we are not going to see that. But let me check. Yeah, so we're still here. We still have this form. It deleted our movie, but we didn't see that nice confirmation message. Does anyone know why? What are we missing? What have we not done yet? Okay, so I'll give you a hint, which is we need to add something to this form. Because remember I said by default it's going to go back to the same route. And instead of going to the same route, we wanted to submit this form request to our new add route. So what do we need to change about our form so that it goes to our new route? Yeah, exactly. So we want to add an attribute to this form. We want to specify its action attribute. Action equals something, and what should that something be? It's simply the route that we want to go to, which is, anyone? Yeah, /add. /add. So this is usually specified, this is specified relative to where you currently are, so we don't have to do the full path. We just have to say /add because we're currently at /nothing. And notice I can put quotes inside of quotes here because we're using these triple quotes. Otherwise, we could have used this works equally well. Actually, was it for HTML? I actually can't remember if in HTML you can use single quotes. So, well, let's just find out. I'm going to refresh this, type something. Beautiful. So what happened here is these single quotes did work, and our form now says that it sends a request to, it's specifying where we want to send the request to, which is /add. So the person typed some stuff, they submitted it, then the app, the Google App Engine launcher is sitting here with the server listening for requests, and a new request came in because I clicked submit, and it said, hey, a request came in to the /add route. So I'm gonna do, let's see, this thing. I'm gonna have this class handle the request, and it was a get request, so I'm gonna call the get method, and then this code got executed. And what we did is we wrote some stuff to the response, and then the response got sent back to the browser, and then the browser showed this on our screen. Questions so far? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I would say it's not working for some of you. So I think that's inevitably going to happen in some of these. So at the point where you can't get it to work, I would say kick back and relax and watch. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think you're referring to the port being the number here. Yeah, good question. Um, so notice I have, so the question was why is the port number here, localhost colon whatever, different, why is mine different from what you guys had last week or in general what you guys are seeing, which is probably 8080 or maybe 8,000. So the notice how I have a bunch of these projects here. So what Google App Engine is doing is every time I make a new one, if I make a new project, it's going to automatically decide what these things should be, and it sort of increments them and tries to make them different. The reason being, I might want to run multiple projects at once or something, and you can't be listening. You can't have multiple apps listening on the same port, so it just sort of arbitrarily picks a different port number to listen to the different apps. That makes sense? Yeah, good question. Cool. So now what we want to do is, what's the first thing we should do? Let's do this. So we want, instead of just saying you added a movie, we want to actually confirm that we received the actual movie. So we want to say something like you added The Big Lebowski or whatever they typed. Because generally speaking, we're going to want to know exactly what they typed. So the way we can get that information, we have to do something on both sides. We have to do one thing when we submit the form, and we have to do another thing when we receive the form. So I'm going to work backwards, and I'm going to start with on the receiving end. So here we are, a request just came in, and we want to say, work backwards all the way. So I'm going to say, added movie equals something. We'll fill this in a sec. And then I'm going to say, oops, wait, hold on. Okay. We want to say added movie space was added to your watch list. Watch list. Yay. I forget, in Java, to concatenate strings, do you also use the plus sign? Okay. Good, so that's one thing that's familiar. So we have a string here, and we have a string here, and we're just using a plus sign to concatenate them into one big string, and then we're writing that to the response. I just noticed that I didn't say, apparently, self.response. .write. I just said self.write, and it worked anyway. I don't quite know how this particular web app 2 thing works, but apparently you can do either of those things. Also, sorry? Oh, I did, I just deleted it or something? Yeah, I could have sworn I wrote that. I don't know, I looked over and it just said this. I don't know what happened there. You can go consult the film later and maybe find out. Let's just keep that. Cool. So this is going to work except for this part. So we need to figure out what the movie was. The way we can do that is in any of these methods, we have access to an object representing the request that's coming in. So a request is coming in. Maybe there's information in there that we need. In this case, there is. So self.request. So just like I'm saying self.response.write, it's a Python object representing the HTTP response that we are ultimately going to send. And then web app 2 handles the actual sending of it and all that stuff. But we just treat it like an object. And just like we have an object for the response, we have another object for the request. And it's very accessible here. It's just self.request. And within that request is the movie that the person typed. And we can get that we can figure out what that is by saying request.get. So get is a method on this thing, which is different from the method. This is more similar to a Java. This is almost like a Java getter. Except instead of being a hard-coded getter for a particular thing, it's not like get movie or something, because the developers of web app 2 they can't possibly like know that our thing is about movies. So there's no one who wrote a method called getMovie, but they did write a method called get, and then you give it a parameter name, and then if this matches up with the parameter name that's in one of the headers on the HTTP request, then it'll give you back whatever is stored there. So essentially, it's our job to make sure that on both ends of this, there's some field called movie. Should we call this movie? Let's just keep going. Let's call it added movie. And yeah, let's call it added movie. So now let's try this, and it's not going to work yet. Let's see what it says. Actually, I'm going to go back. This is our movie. Okay. So it didn't crash. It just failed to get something. And so this ends up being null or something. And so our response ends up being just the second half of this string. So the reason it didn't work is we have to do something up here so that this, quote, added movie field is a real field inside of our request that gets sent out. So that's the job of our form. And does anyone have any thoughts of what that is, of what it is we need to do to our form here? It's another attribute. So just like last time, we had to add this action attribute. We want somewhere in here, we need to add an attribute, something equals something. Yeah. Yeah, totally. So you're talking about this? Yeah, so it's something in here. What is it? Name. Yeah, it needs a name. So name is another attribute that you can put on these inputs, and it's a very important one because this specifies the key name that on the other side, when you open the box, so to speak, you know to look for whatever you specified as the name. So here, we want this to be the exact same thing. So what this does is, it says, I want a text box where the user can type, and whatever they end up typing, I want to store that as like a key value pair in the request that I end up sending out. So I'm going to send out a request, and it's going to say, hey, there's some extra information here. there's a thing called added movie, and its value is the Big Lebowski, or whatever the person typed. Then on the other end, we know to look for the thing whose key is added movie, and then its value will get stored in this variable. Does that make sense? Try again. Beautiful. Now, the last thing I want to do is just make this, oh, two more things. So, let's see. What order should we do this? Okay, so first, I want to just make this look slightly nicer. And let's put the movie title in bold so that it's just somewhat highlighted as something special, I guess. I don't know. So there's an HTML tag called strong. Kind of hard to come up with a good variable name. I'm going to call it movie strong. So this is, no, actually I'm going to call it movie element. So this is the name of the movie, but then now I'm going to put it inside an actual HTML tag and turn it into an HTML element. So I'll call it movie element. And so then this, instead of just returning the plain string, we're going to return the HTML element. It's a tag called strong, which you use to specify that you want a particular piece of content to have some extra oomph to it, which by default just bolds the text, which is great. That's what we want here. Strong plus added movie plus close the strong tag. See if that works. Yeah, great. Now this is bold. And I'm going to go a little further actually. I'm going to say, I'm going to put the whole thing inside a paragraph. Instead of just being raw text, we want all of this to be inside of a paragraph tag. So I'll just say, now I'll say response equals P plus movie element plus this sentence thing plus closing P tag. And then we just write the response. So all I did here is I put a paragraph around the content. It actually looks the same, but in a larger context, it's going to fit in more nicely with, it's going to play nicely with the rest of our HTML, which is what I want to do now. So you guys learned a little bit about HTML over the past couple of weeks, and in like your, what do you call, HTML me something, in that project, you had like a head and a body and all that sort of boilerplate wrapper stuff around your HTML content. And we want to be, so notice I do have this stuff. So this is, I'm using the dev tools to inspect the page we're looking at. And the browser, if it just, so we never responded with any of this. We didn't say HTML, head, body, blah, blah, blah. We just said this stuff. And it's, by default, it's gonna, that's because the browser can just, by default, if you give it just some content, it'll wrap it in that stuff. But probably nice for us to do that ourselves. Because I think ultimately we're going to want to put some attributes or maybe some child elements inside our head. For example, we might want to put a title and stuff like that. So let's Also ignore this. This is some weird Chrome extension I have that won't go away. So anyway, we want, our response itself was just this. We want our response to contain also like all this other junk. HTML. Don't actually type this if you're following along. Head, blah, 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 right? But that's kind of annoying to just have to do it here. That's why we're not going to do it here. What I'm going to do is just define some of that stuff in like a global variable out here. And then we'll reuse it in a couple places. So the main stuff we want is, we want it all to be wrapped. So we need something at the beginning and something at the end. So I think basically, at the beginning we want this thing, this stuff, we want HTML, and then a head with like, we'll put a title in there. And then we want the beginning of a body tag. Then we can write whatever custom stuff we want, and then at the end we'll just close the body tag and we'll close the HTML tag. I'm going to make two reusable variables that we can use to wrap everything. So I'll say page header equals HTML, and then we'll do this doc tag. Oh wait, that's the previous thing, right? I don't even know. Right. Then we open our HTML and then open a head tag. Close our head tag. Inside here, I'm going to put a title. Close my title. Click list. And then we're going to open a body tag. Oops. Okay. Then I'll make another one called page footer. How did it know? And I'm going to close the body, and I'm going to close the HTML tag. So these are just some reusable strings that we have stored in some variables that we can use to tap onto the beginning and the end of some stuff. So like here, I'll say response equals page header, header plus the form plus page footer. And then same thing here, so maybe I'll say, I'm going to rename this to sentence, say. Sentence is kind of dumb. I'm going to say confirmation. Because we're confirming that the thing they did worked. And then I'll say response equals page header plus confirmation plus page footer. And in the near future, we will not, ultimately you don't code like this. You don't have like all these strings that you're like tacking together. But for now, we're doing that because it's the easiest way to get started. In maybe next week or something, you're going to work with templates, which make it easier to work with this stuff. Any question about what I just did here? Let's see if it worked. The only difference is going to be, I think, everything will look more or less the same. The formatting, there might be like slightly different margins or something, like spacing here. And then this title, instead of saying localhost blah blah blah, it should say worthless because we specified that as a page title. Yeah, perfect. And the home page should look like that as well. Yep, great. One other thing I noticed in the URL that we should look at real quick is, let's add a movie. So notice how the URL, instead of just saying /add and then that's it, there's this other stuff, and there's a very this will always be in the same format, so you'll get used to this. It says /add and then question mark. Question mark means there's some like parameters coming up, and then what follows are each of the parameters. So in our case, we only have one, but this is that extra stuff we tacked on to the HTTP request. So it's often called a query parameter in our string. There's one query parameter, and the key is added movie, and the value is Star Wars, and spaces aren't allowed in a URL, so the space gets replaced with plus. And that stuff happens. Actually, that's a great segue to what I want to talk about next, which is let's say. So what we're doing here is we're adding something to someone's list. We're adding Star Wars to their list. There's something kind of bad about this, which is that what if I just were to type? What if I'm a person, I just want to visit this site, and for whatever reason, maybe someone sent me a link or something, or maybe I'm just a hacker trying to be mischievous or something. What if I just type that whole URL? So if I type flicklist.com/add question mark added movie equals star plus Wars, we should get the same response. And we do. I'll change it just so we can convince ourselves that it's really different. Yeah, Star Wars 2. This is kind of bad that that's the case. So like, what if I'm here, I'm a user, I added Star Wars 2 to my list, now I just like hit refresh. Now, it still says Star Wars 2 is added to your list, but this is kind of weird because we're in this like pretend mode where we're just giving a confirmation message, but imagine that what we're actually doing whenever this request comes in is we're like, I'll add a pseudocode comment that's like, add the thing to the list. So this is going to go and like modify the person's list and add something to it every time this request comes in. And that's actually bad because we don't want to be doing that again and again. A, because it's already in their list, but we could have some kind of check that only adds it if it's not already there. The real thing is like adding something to my list if I'm a user is it's like an important action. It's like it's modifying my data. And as a general rule, you never want to be able to modify your data just by like visiting a URL. Like, it's a bad user experience because I might not have even intended that. If someone sends me a link, yeah, so someone could like pull a prank on me by sending me this link, and now Star Wars 2 is in my list, and I didn't even say that I wanted it in my list, and maybe I hate Star Wars 2, and we don't want that to be possible. So it should only be possible to add it to my list if I actually went through the trouble. If I actually went through the trouble of filling out this form, and I said Star Wars 2 and I clicked this button, then it should happen. And it should only happen once. It shouldn't happen again if I refresh the page, etc. So the big thing I'm getting at here is this is the big difference between a GET and a POST request. What we really want here is we want a POST request. And the reason why is that a POST request will not, or it'll at least give us we'll see what happens, but it's going to be it's going to be harder to accidentally have that happen. So I'm going to add another attribute to the form, method, and here we specify. So if we didn't specify, it's going to be get by default. We actually want this to be post. This does not have to be all caps, but it often is, so I'm going to do that. And first thing I'm going to do is just try this, and I think it's going to break. So we got an error that says 405 method not allowed. The method post is not allowed for this resource. So we tried to use the method post instead of the method get, but it says the method is not allowed for this resource, and this resource just means our website / ad. Why is it not allowed? Well, we never actually implemented it. We don't have a method. Web app 2 doesn't know what to do with the post method on this class because it's looking for a method or a post request because it's looking for a method called post and it doesn't see that. So what we need another method here. It's just called def post. And actually, we don't need a get, so I'm just going to go ahead and change this. And so now we can handle incoming post requests. Let's see if that fixed it. Yeah, beautiful. Now it works again. But notice one thing, which is that our query parameters no longer show up in the URL. So one of the big reasons for that is a post request. Another scenario where you're going to use a post request is for someone submitting anything that's secure, the information that needs to be kept secure. So if you are registering on a site and you're filling in a password, it's always going to be a post request, and it's definitely not going to show up here. The reason being, it's very insecure to have that stuff show up. If you say that your password equals I love Star Wars, then like anyone who's looking over your shoulder could see that, and you don't want that to be true. So if you don't want stuff to show up in the URL, that's another reason to use post request. And additionally, let's go back and do it again. Add this. Yeah, cool. Okay. So remember that last time we had this other problem of like I add this movie to my list, and then I just refresh the page, or say even better, say someone sends me this link. It's no longer possible for me to accidentally add a movie to my list just by visiting this URL, because if you just visit this URL in your site or in your browser, then you're actually sending a get request, not a post request. And so because we don't because our logic for handling for adding things only happens here, then it's no longer possible to even get to this point unless you really did fill out this form. Any questions? Cool. I believe that is all I have today. So I'm going to turn off the recording.